welcome to The Point of View. This is your favorite current affairs show on Ghana Television. On The Point of View, we get the right guests, we ask them relevant questions on issues that matter to you. It's an interactive show. Get in touch via the WhatsApp number on the screen and also on the stream if you're watching on any of the social media platforms. Well, today is the 2 days after Ghana's 64th Independence Day celebration. Tonight we reflect on our independence and Africa's quest for economic independence with a very special guest. Stay with us.
This looks different.
It is. See for yourself.
Okay, so it's a photo.
Look closer. Photos within photos.
What about video?
8K video. Beyond cinema quality.
So...
You can pull portrait quality photos straight from video.
But will it last the whole trip?
Battery for the whole trip and the way back.
This is different.
Told you.
Good Day Energy Drink keeps you going. Available in major supermarkets and shops near you. Excessive drinking can be detrimental to your health. Not recommended for persons under 18 years, lactating mothers, pregnant women, and people sensitive to caffeine. This advert is FDA approved.
So Ghana is 64 years old, at least officially, based on the date we got independence. That was on Saturday. Monday is a holiday, and so we're celebrating that day, reflecting on what has been and what might have been. Tonight, I'm going to talk to a man I respect for his views, not just on Ghana, but on the whole African attempt to gain independence, relevance, and respect. Dr. Nimoy Thompson has worked in many, many places. He's consulted at the highest level. He's also advised governments. And at heart, he's an economist and a writer. Doc, welcome to The
Thank you very much. Thank you.
How often do you write?
I'm actually still writing now. Not much time. I'm actually doing Ghana's history, development history, 70 years. I'm looking at it from 1951 to 2001, as opposed to 1957.
The first time I heard of you, you appeared on a radio station and you were described as an Africanomist. I'm sure this is over 15 years.
They're close to 20, actually, if not more.
What is an Africanomist?
This was way back when. It was actually the name of a consulting firm at the time, Africanomics.
Okay.
With perspective on Africa's development, given the fact that we have mostly post-colonial economies. And so our strategies for development will necessarily have to be different from the strategies that the industrialized countries used. And that one of the biggest flaws of Africa's development strategy is that we are blindly copying them. It's not that there's something wrong with them per se, but we need to adapt as opposed to blindly copy them, because they were pioneers in development, if you will. And we are more or less trying to close the gap. But we help them to develop. There's an argument that without us, they couldn't have developed. We are the flip side of their development. The underdevelopment of Africa meant so we need different strategies, and that was the perspective, and that has informed me since then, along with Garveyism and Nkrumahism.
And it's been quite a journey, right?
Yes.
Ending up advising some governments, but you're still writing.
Yes.
I think your latest article was on COVID.
The COVID Creed, I call it.
The COVID Creed.
Yes, the COVID Creed. It's basically 5, 6 different points on what I think Africa needs to do. I had done some work for the UN. Initially, I did some study on local economic development for the UN Capital Development Fund. This was just before COVID hit.
Okay.
So after COVID hit, then the UN Economic Commission for Europe then asked me to help write the framework and principles for resilient economic recovery from the COVID-19. It was a very interesting exercise.
The COVID creed.
The COVID creed.
As against the Apostles' Creed. I'll probably come back to you during the interview.
Okay.
Look, I don't know what independence means, and this is an interesting time. We are in the middle of a pandemic. There's a vaccine coming. State of Nation will be delivered tomorrow.
Yes.
Budget to be read 3 days from that. What sort of feeling does Independence Day bring to you?
It brings a sense of disappointment, honestly, to be on the balance. Yes, we've achieved a few things here and there. But if you look at our potential back then, compared to where we are now, it's a massive disappointment. You look at our per capita income, for example. In 1962, we were higher than that of South Korea, about 73% or so. Today, we have just 2,200. They have over close to 30,000 US dollars. If we had maintained the same ratio, for example, would have been over 50,000 US dollars compared to 2,200 today. We have massive underdevelopment in certain key development areas. You look at sanitation, for example. We have one of the lowest basic coverage for sanitation around the world, less than 20%. Households with running water less than 30% and so forth and so on. So, in a certain sense, we have become a disappointment because at the beginning of the 1960s and independence, we represented the hope for Africa. Because here we were, a country of only 5 million people, led by someone from a very obscure village somewhere that most Gold Coasters had not even heard of. Forget about the rest of the world. And then out of nowhere, we bring down an empire in Africa. And then Nkrumah gets up there and declares that the independence of Ghana is meaningless unless it is linked up with the total liberation of the African continent. He was talking to the UK, of course, Britain. He was talking to the French. He was talking to the Portuguese, even the Spanish. So this was a momentous, and Ghana was a big, you see, we now take Ghana for granted. But in those days, we were the headlines, the global headlines. Everybody was talking about this obscure country in Africa that had chased away the British with a very dynamic, charismatic leader. What is going on? And so everyone was talking about Ghana. Even the father of modern South Korea, Park Chung-hee, in 1963, came down here with his daughter, who later, more recently, became president. He came down here to come and understudy Nkrumah's 7-year development plan. That's how much of a pioneer Ghana was at the time. And then somewhere along the line, we dropped it all, and we've been in a bit of a free fall. There's been a bit of stability in more recent times, but we have massively underperformed. Look at our infrastructure deficit. It's simply breathtaking, and you wonder exactly what are we even aware of the magnitude of the problem? We drive some of the best cars in the world on some of the worst roads, and the moral and ethical contradictions seem lost on the people who are perpetrating this thing. So I think it's time, and as I said on a couple of platforms the other day, that we should really step back and have an honest, no-holds-barred, non-partisan discussion. I think in the synopsis you sent me at some point towards the end, you asked about the kind of government, because governance is also critical. It's not just the policy, but the context in which you implement the policy. I think we've stumbled onto a form of governance that's actually anti-development.
So let's start with Nkrumah, because he was the figurehead, not the figurehead, the leader.
Exactly, the pioneer,
What did he mean by independence for Ghana? Did he understand that it was much more than our allegiance to the Queen, bringing down the flag, having our own government? Did he know that there were other levels of this thing?
Sure. That was the material part of it, besides the political symbolism of bringing down a flag. That's why he says, seek ye first the political kingdom, and all else shall be added. That meant the material improvement of the people. The question then was the strategy, the approach. How do we, now that we've used a particular approach to achieve political independence, what is the strategy for social and economic, or economic and social independence? And that's what the greatest task really was for him. So, and this is where, for instance, he had those debates with Arthur Lewis and so forth and so on. What is the best strategy? Nkrumah thought that we should move at a much quicker pace. He said at one point that where the British took 100 years to do something, we should take 10 years. And where they took 10 years, we should take 1 year. So he was in a hurry. And of course, in the process, there were tensions here and there, dislocations in the economy. But it's all part of the process of economic development. No country anywhere, whether industrialized or not, has developed on a smooth trajectory. There are always setbacks. They even had depression and so forth. Some had wars. So it wasn't surprising that Nkrumah would eventually run into challenges in managing the economy and trying to transform our economy, while at the same time also trying to promote African unity. Because he realized that there was no way we could do it alone. Yes, independence, but we triggered it. Others necessarily then keyed into it. Now with the economy, by the time he was overthrown, we were about 6.7 thereabout. We were still a relatively small country, but he appreciated the importance of inter-African dependence in development. That's why he made the overtures to Guinea, Niger, and Mali, and all those other countries.
There's a view that Lewis has been proved right in the argument with Nkrumah in many cases because, as you said, Nkrumah was more in a hurry. Lewis felt that, for example, we needed to raise the level of investment, make use of some of the older structures. Nkrumah was more interested in a more radical approach. Nkrumah therefore alarmed some of the quote-unquote forces very early. So, and because, in fact, it was in the discourse between Nkrumah and Lewis that the whole Seek Ye First, the political kingdom, was first sort of heard. Now, I'm not sure I know all of Lewis's policies, but of course, hindsight is always clear. But is there a sense in which Nkrumah's hurry, being in a hurry, and his showing all his cards early, contributed to his downfall and Ghana's stagnation? That he could have been a bit more subtle. He could have been a bit more... Because if you read some of the papers about what the Western world was saying about his approach, if he had hastened a bit slower and sort of solidified the base better, then he could have achieved more.
Yes, I agree with that conclusion, but not with the premise in terms of Lewis. The whole issue of Seek Ye First, the political kingdom, came long before Lewis. This was at the height of the agitation. And Lewis came in and out in the early 50s when Nkrumah became leader of government business, and he offered some advice and so forth and so on. But by and large, he and Nkrumah never really disagreed much in terms of substance. It was the issue of scale and pace. Lewis talked about, quote-unquote, small industrialized or small program for industrialization. Nkrumah thought that we should be a bit more ambitious and move faster. He agreed that we couldn't do everything in the short term, but we shouldn't also be complacent either. We should be more ambitious. Lewis was more or less an academic. He wasn't a politician. Nkrumah was a politician, quasi-academic. So their perspectives on development were somewhat different. But I do agree with you that in the sense that the issue of being cautious, or I forget the term you used, in terms of...
being more subtle. He
laid
his hand too early.
That, it wasn't even too late. This was more towards the end. That's what triggered the military coup. For instance, the writing of the book, Neocolonialism, the Last Stage of Imperialism.
That caused a lot of...
That caused... Now, I've always had a problem with that. I thought that it was a fatal error. Not so much the content of the book. The content of the book was 100% spot on. I think was ill-advised, especially when the very people he was criticizing were those who were also helping us build a dam and so forth and so on. It's like, you have your hand in somebody's mouth and you conk them in the head. They're going to bite you.
You're talking about people like Kaiser, for example, in the American industrialist whose sort of company was helping put up
and then the Americans, because Akosombo and Ghana itself was so important at that time, at the highest level of the U.S. government, they were interested in seeing Ghana succeed. At the highest level of the UK government, they were, even though they reluctantly left, they also wanted to see that, only for them to be gobsmacked with this book that then attacked everything that they felt that they had used. So much as the content of the book itself was valid, as they say, discretion is the better part of valor. or as they say in Akan, the mute dreams are in his head. So he still could have dealt with them, but be that as it may, he didn't. And then they used that as an opportunity, as an excuse to then truncate his agenda. We haven't quite recovered from that. So subtlety, yes. And these are some of the lessons that we have to learn, that we have to deal with the rest of the world. It's not everything they do that we would like. Capitalism itself, in its home and where it operates, it hasn't always been favorable. But yet they found a way of some sort of a cohabitation, some sort of accommodation in handling that.
There's a view that when African leaders try to be forthright and say it as it is in terms of the world economic order and try to quickly change that by blatantly giving an advantage to locals and trying to say to foreign interests that, look, this is our country, our resources will be used for our people, they inevitably will end up like Mugabe or maybe even Gbagbo or possibly Magafuli. Not very sure. But the point is, the interests that ensure that we only export raw materials, we don't process them, and that we are always dependent on the global economics and global capitalist system. If you confront it frontally alone, you will inevitably fail.
Exactly. I couldn't agree more.
You believe that?
Yes. That's why a continental unity at whatever level required must be pursued. Because what happens now that we are so divided with different allegiances and whatnot, it's easier to play one country against the other. And look at a country like the United States with the largest economy in the world, over 21, 22 trillion US dollars, picking on a poor country like Rwanda, all because Rwanda says they won't import Brunei anymore. But other African countries don't have any such problem. And yet when the US was picking on Uganda, everyone more or less kept quiet to do that. But ultimately, it's your economic might that will determine whether or not you can face them or not. And this is where I think the free trade, a continental free trade agreement should provide the potential for us to develop the economic might to be able to speak up.
But what should African countries do first? So, for example, we are told the infrastructure, if you take Ghana, our rails were designed to bring stuff from the middle and the north to the coast to be exported out. In fact, I'm told that if you look at the gauge for trains in Anglophone African countries, it's different from gauges in Francophone, which means that we were not, the system was not designed for Ghana to travel to Cote d'Ivoire or Togo. Essentially from Kumasi to Tema to Britain. Same with Francophone countries, right? So where does an African leader start? And the fact is that we don't produce that different things. Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, same cocoa, cashew, tubers, all right? So if you say you want to do African trade, are you going to start with the infrastructure? Is it the need? Because most people are also importing things from the West and China. So what is the starting point for this type of conversation about economic freedom?
There are two types of infrastructure. You've discussed fiscal infrastructure, rails and so forth and so on. And even then, to be honest with you, we really cannot blame the colonialists entirely on that. Because for what it's worth, they still did leave us some railway infrastructure, for better or for worse. But today, all over the country, we allow them to decay. You may want to one day send one of your reporters to Mangwasi in the eastern region to go and see that. I've taken pictures where the railways just disappear into the bushes through neglect, our own neglect. While the colonialists were here, yes, they used that to cart cocoa, but we also used it for transportation and foodstuffs and others. So I wouldn't completely blame them. Our own negligence and lack of vision after independence, certainly after 1966, are to be blamed largely for that. For whatever, they still left the infrastructure there for. In any case, we paid for that. Despite that, they always create the impression, well, we went to Africa and built rails and all that. The rails were built from our resources. Money. So that's the fiscal infrastructure. And there's still a lot of deficit. It's rather unfortunate that almost 10 years on, we are back to doomsday and all that. We can't blame the colonialists for that. It's our own negligence and complacency. But there is also the soft infrastructure, customs, tariffs, non-tariff barriers and so forth and so on. How do you facilitate? Those areas can be worked on. Those are more administrative. And those can be facilitated as quickly as possible, such that we will also simultaneously work on hard infrastructure. And then, even though the statistics are still vague, informally, I've been talking to people, and it's amazing the level and quality of trade that's already taking place among different African countries. During the recent Valentine's Day, you won't believe the number of the quantity of roses, fresh roses, that were imported from Kenya.
Into Ghana?
To Ghana, yes.
Wow.
Fresh. 24 hours. And we have Kenyan Airways flying directly from there. But most people are not aware of that. Of course, they fly flowers to Europe and so forth. I've seen Kenyan bacon in the stores. Of course, I've seen Ghanaian. And I have to pay great tribute to Ghanaians involved in agro-processing, food processing. I have a ritual whenever I go to the supermarkets. I walk down the aisles and look for made in Ghana foods and so forth and so on. I'm always proud to see the numbers growing. Certainly they have to work on quality and branding. I recently saw one kenke, ice kenke actually, and I loved it. I read the label. It had sugar, it had honey, it had peanuts and all that. But unfortunately, it didn't have nutritional information. Those are the kinds of technical things that we need to work on, so that it wouldn't just be for Africa, but we can also export to other markets. They're no different from the energy drinks that we import from Thailand. The ice kenke that I saw there, it actually tasted quite good. And then I went back the next time, was it 3 days ago, and I realized that the thickness was influenced. So I said, okay, now these are some of the technical issues. Because you can't enjoy it one time and then you go back there.
It's not the same quality.
But then it's not their fault. For instance, the National Board for Small-Scale Industries is supposed to provide that kind of technical assistance to them through the district assemblies. So when you go to the district assemblies, the business assistance centers are there, but they're doing virtually nothing. So the potential, the opportunity has now been presented to us. We have to rise to that. We can blame colonialism only up to a certain point.
Okay.
Beyond that point, we're in charge. And we've been in charge for what? 64 years and 2 days, by the way. So
we'll find out whether we've been in charge, if not colonialism at all, whether the economic policy choices we've made have also been unduly influenced from parts of the West. This is the point of view. My guest is Dr. Nimoy Thompson. We're trying to understand what is left for Ghana and Africa to be truly independent. And of course, today is the celebration, the holiday of independence on our Heritage Month. Stay with us.
Fellow Ghanaians, the Ministry of Health, Ghana Health Service and partners are introducing a vaccine against the deadly coronavirus. From March 2021, Ghana begins a free national vaccine rollout for all persons 18 years and above, starting with healthcare workers, government officials, security services, the aged, and persons with underlying conditions. The COVID-19 vaccine is safe, effective, and has been tested and approved by the FDA. Please remember, the vaccine is an additional preventive measure, so all existing protocols must continue. Let us continue to wear our face mask, frequently wash hands with soap under running water for at least 20 seconds, or sanitize often and practice social distancing. Stop the spread. Get vaccinated against coronavirus for additional protection and prevention. This message is from Ministry of Health, Ghana Health Service and partners. This advertisement is FDA approved.
This looks different.
It is. See for yourself.
Okay, so it's a photo.
Look closer. Photos within photos.
What about video?
8K video. Beyond cinema quality.
So,
You can pull portrait quality photos straight from video.
but will it last the whole trip?
Battery for the whole trip and the way back.
This is different.
Told you.
Welcome back to The Point of View. Tonight is our holiday special. We're celebrating Heritage Month on City. And tonight we're reflecting on Ghana's independence and Africa's quest for economic liberation. My guest, Dr. Nimoy Thompson. I call him an Africanomist. I mean, does all kinds of things. He writes, he's an economist, he's advised various governments, he's worked in various portfolios, but he's also a thinker and he's a Garveyist. Now, I'm going to take you to a video somebody sent me from Nigeria where one of their ministers was addressing a parliamentary hearing. And I feel this captures some of the challenge we face. So take a quick view.
The tragedy of Nigeria began in 1986 when we did the structural adjustment program. When we were persuaded to devalue our currency every week. When I went to school, and many of you are here, the Naira was $1.50. The Naira was almost £1 sterling. They came here, persuaded some brilliant men from Harvard and the World Bank that weekly devaluation was wonderful. 32 years of devaluing your currency until we hit 527. And they were still telling us that the Naira was still overvalued. That brought poverty, misery upon us. Then interest rates went to 30%. So nobody could build a factory, start a farm, produce anything, or create jobs. Because every time you bring in a shipload of rice, you also bring in a shipload of unemployment. Because you are transferring your wealth to sustain other economies. Somehow, Nigerians didn't notice it. So we became a nation of importers. Toothpicks. Each year it cost us $18 million. Importing toothpicks. Tomato paste, $400 million. So you talked about tomatoes now. One basket in town now is less than 2,000 naira. The farmers are losing money because the processors don't have enough funds to set up factories. They are going to do tomato paste. It's food-grade stainless steel. You can't just use anything because you'll be putting poison in people's stomachs. 2 factories have started off. I believe by the middle of next year, we can comfortably tell importers of tomato paste to stop. But when you do, you make enemies. Even the rice we're trying to reduce. We have enemies, heavy enemies, people who can kill if they have a chance, because you're spoiling their business. And let nobody take it lightly. These guys have seized this country's economy, they've taken us hostage, and they have no intention of giving up. Because this is a huge market, a very sweet market, and they have taken control. And I'm saying it because I have been in this business for 41 years and I can tell you some history. Abdullah Adamu is here. Import milk, sugar, toothpicks, toothpaste, handkerchiefs, pencils. We don't make. To cure Nigerians of that malady will take a while. It will take a strong government. That's the truth. And they are not happy that we're cutting down. When we cut down, they lose money there. So you see all sorts of publications. We're telling lies. We're not growing rice. We're trying to demoralize the local farmers and make sure that the economy fails. That's the story of imports. Now, I read a story recently in the newspapers. The French ambassador, the champagne ambassador in Nigeria, gave an article to The Guardian. He said Nigerians love life. We are the biggest consumers of champagne on planet Earth, more than the French who make it. There are parties you attend in some places where the only drink is champagne. Of course, the individual is free to spend his money, but his money comes from Nigeria's commonwealth. So on imports, it will take a while for us to get used to local goods and accept that we should consume what we produce and produce what we want to consume. So I take your point. We have to take stern measures to cut down on imports because these young boys and girls who have no jobs today are not going to allow us to carry on enjoying life at their expense. They need jobs. They need jobs. They are children. They've graduated, they've come back home to begin a second childhood because there's no factory.
So that was a former Minister of Agric in Nigeria, Audu Ogbe. He was speaking before a Senate Committee on Agriculture a couple of years ago, and this was widely publicized. First thing is, how true is what he said? Is he on point?
Well, the economic policies, the issue of devaluation and so forth and so on. But we should bear in mind there's validity in his argument. But ultimately, they don't fly in here to impose these things on us. Typically, we run our economists into the ground, and then we invite them to come and advise us. And invariably, they prescribe the same things. In fact, sometimes we see, and I've seen a document, for instance, that was meant for Sierra Leone once, and they brought it to Ghana, and they forgot to cross out the Leone. And so they move around with the same advice. It's up to us to develop our own analytical and intellectual capacity to face them when they come with these prescriptions. But too often, we're ill-prepared. Even when we go to conferences, it's not just Nigeria or Ghana, it's across the continent. If you see, sometimes you hear, let's say, a 5-person delegation going to an international trade negotiations. It may very well be that only 2 of them are actually government officials. The remaining 3 are not even in government at all. Somebody's friends or pastor. There was a time I met somebody's pastor on a flight, that kind of thing. So we've also been doing harm to ourselves in terms of our efforts to get the best. Because
he suggests that there is a strong lobby to I won't use the word force. There's a strong import lobby in African countries, and sometimes working with foreign interests to prevent governments from economic policies that truly liberate.
That has always been the case, not just in Nigeria, but all over. And it is the responsibility of government to identify those interests and work with them or get them out of the way. It happens all over. As we speak, I'm sure you've been following what's going on in India now with the farmers complaining. In the U.S., it used to be meat and wheat and all these things. So there will always be vested interests who want to preserve the status quo. That's where decisive leadership and policies come in. Nigeria has not only failed itself, but it has also failed Africa, in the sense that it's the country with the heft, in terms of size and all that, to actually lead the continent in some of these reforms. But when it comes to those decisive moments, they tend to back up. Look at their attitude towards the African Continental Free Trade Area, for instance. They started putting up all sorts of excuses. They're going back to go and review and do studies and whatnot. By the time they came back, Ghana and South Africa had moved the process. And now the biggest country on the continent is trying to lead from behind. So they need to also step up. Because they
tried to ban, there was a period they banned importation of goods. They claimed there was a lot of smuggling of rice.
Yes, I remember
through Benin.
Yes.
So they closed their border for a while.
Yes.
What do you make of that?
And it affected us, and it affected regional trade and all that. They have the right, the sovereign right, of course, to protect their own interest. But they also have that responsibility, given their position, their potential role, to also, because it's like, I don't know if you know the theory of hegemony. You need to necessarily take in make certain sacrifices if you want to be a leader. And that is what they've failed to do so far. In terms of the economic policies and their harmful effects and all that, he's absolutely right. We came in, you should devalue and devalue and devalue. The thing is that the devaluation is part of the liberalization thing. You have to liberalize interest rates, but there's no parallel program for industrialization. They just keep you to issues like agriculture and so forth. You need to have the authority to be able to cut through. But especially in my experience in government, I realized that we dealt, for instance, with the IMF without always fully understanding some of the technical issues. We simply nodded our heads because it came from the IMF. But once you go through some of the analysis they made, you realize that, no, these guys are actually wrong. And then you
in advising former President Mahama, did you ever face that type of thing where you know clearly what the path Ghana should take, but the interests and the forces at play we're not going to agree for that policy path to be chosen?
Because even within a government, there are some, forget about the opposition attacking you and all that. Within the government itself.
Inside the government?
Inside government, there are always conflicting interests.
Wow.
Inside any government, not just Mahama's government, I'm sure within this government and so forth and so on. There are
conflicting interests.
Conflicting interests. Sometimes it's selfish, sometimes it's earnest. The person believes that, no, I think we should travel by this means. The other person thinks that kind of thing. There are instances also where people simply have selfish agendas, but you may not know that. And so it's up to the leader then to more or less sit down, consider all the factors and try and cut through it and get to the heart of the matter.
So if we take NDC and MPP, you're saying that even within those two political parties, there isn't some unanimity about, say, for example, our economic independence and the fact that we must have an economy with Ghanaians at the commanding heights of same. Even within those two parties, there could be people who don't believe in that.
There are. In fact, as a matter of fact, I have friends in the MPP, one particular friend who's seriously opposed to a lot of the things they do, but he's a leading member also.
Really?
Oh, yes. For instance, he doesn't favor
Free SHS?
Free SHS, for example. He's a strong advocate for property rights and all sorts of things.
Really?
Yes. But there's nothing extraordinary about that. It happens in all governments around the world. But the roads always lead to the doorstep of the leader, who must ultimately take the responsibility. I just mentioned South Korea earlier. When they started in the 1960s, they faced the exact same problems where people tried to dissuade them. In fact, in the case of South Korea, when they wanted to develop the steel industry, the World Bank sent a team there to try and dissuade them from doing that and told them to actually focus rather on agriculture because they didn't have quote-unquote comparative advantage. And South Korea basically told them to go to hell, that they were going to create that comparative advantage. So they then, Park Chung-hee actually went to Japan and borrowed money to invest because the World Bank said, well, if you're not taking our advice, we're not then going to give you the money. And that's the kind of decisive leadership you need. Imagine if they had gone along with that. They wouldn't have the auto industry or the steel industry that created the basis for the auto industry. Much later, we learned that the team that went there and tried to advise them against development of the steel industry were actually influenced by American steel industry interests that didn't want any competition from South Korea. So there are always these forces lurking out there in the world. It is up to us. In Ghana, for example, as I speak with you, we don't even have a think tank, a government think tank, to do cutting-edge policy analysis and say, this is what we see is going to happen, this is what is happening in Asia, we have zero, nothing.
But I thought when you look at manifestos, last 3 months we were discussing manifestos. So if we take manifestos and compare them to the kind of policy you're talking about, there's a wide world of difference?
Of course. Manifestos are just a laundry list of promises. It's a wish list for the most part.
They may not even be internally consistent.
That's the problem. But you see, we need to understand the role of manifestos are party documents for elections.
Well, but the MPP government, every time, in fact, some ministers, when they come, they said, we said in our manifesto we'll do this.
But let me explain that. Let me explain the limitations.
Yes.
They are for elections, for party document. After the party wins, the manifesto then must be transformed into a national development program, which is mandated by the Constitution that the president must prepare the coordinated program. So now you need to transfer or transform the manifesto. I've had the unique opportunity, actually, of supervising the transformation of NDC's manifesto into a national development plan, and then the MPP's manifesto in 2016 into a national development plan. And I can tell you that in the larger scheme of things, the content of all the manifestos will not make up more than 15% of what we actually need to transform this country. It is limited in its potency for economic transformation. And that's why we need a place like the National Development Planning Commission, not just for planning, but also to serve as a think tank for government. We don't have that. So we're flying blind for the most part.
Wow. The CPP's General Secretary, Nana Yaa-Chimpim Jantua, issued a statement on Independence Day, and I'm just quoting a part. She condemned the neoliberal market policies and blamed them for being responsible for the country's dilapidated state of infrastructure, deplorable social amenities, and poor sanitation. And she basically said that the very foundation of economic independence, which was laid by Osajifo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah under the CPP, has been totally shattered through the implementation of neoliberal market policies. My question to you is, in those years of independence, a lot of those years have been led by Rawlings, who started out on the left, and the NDC, which is supposed to be left of center. How come 64 years after independence, CPP is still saying that predominantly neoliberal? So the point is that whether it's even a left or right, they're still implementing neoliberal policies. I mean, I find that a bit perplexed, confusing.
Yeah, that's the intellectual rhetoric, if you will. The reality on the ground is that we actually have a heterodox approach. In
In
other
Ghana?
words, in Ghana, yes, ultimately, of course. We don't have pure socialism in Ghana?
No,
Nor do we have...
We have a heterodox approach?
Yeah, of course.
Really?
That's how come you can have a government that professes to espouse pure market solutions. We'll say, okay, let's give every child free secondary education. It's a blend. And in no country do you have a pure... You see, we have kind of falsified the whole ideological debate. In the final analysis, it's more, yes, neoliberal policies where they say the price is everything. Prices solve everything.
The market is
The market, that definitely can, especially where human welfare, human development is concerned. There are instances where you can apply those, the use of infrastructure and so forth and so on. But when it comes to education, health and so forth and so on, they will always create a problem. But in practice, you always have some blend of some socialist principles, some free market principles. We gained independence right when the rest of the world had come out of the Second World War. And there was a strong tendency towards giving the state a key role in development, not just in Ghana and later on in Africa, but even in Europe. The state played a major role in the reconstruction effort. And then by the 1970s, 80s, they realized that the state had actually ground to a halt. The state-owned enterprises and so forth had, rather than facilitating growth, they had become a drain on the fiscals or budgets of the economies and others. And so we then, of course, they came in and they swung to the other extreme, that if the state has failed, then maybe we should try, or we should just give everything to... That also turned out to be problematic, and we've lived the consequences of it. In practice, the truth is always somewhere in the middle. It's not always the price of market that will solve the problems. The market is efficient or effective in producing the goods and services, but it's always not equitable in the distribution of those goods and services. That's where social policies then come in. But you don't want to blame everything on one particular view of
But you agree that our economic policies for the past at least 30 years have been neoliberal. When Rawlings, after his... I mean, you know that he turned to the IMF, Economic Recovery Program, when he realized he wasn't going to get money from the Chinese or the Russians or from the Cubans or wherever. And everything we've done since Rawlings has really been just tweaking it a bit. It's not been that radically different.
I couldn't agree with you more. But beyond those labels, there are substantive policy issues. What does neoliberalism or statism has to do with the fact that when we have money in this country, our first priority is to buy a bunch of V8s while neglecting schools? There's a fundamental flaw in the quality of governance itself, whether it's socialist, whether it's neoliberal, it's whatever. So, yes, we can talk about the ideological framework for policies, but the substantive aspect of policies, at the time Nkrumah was pursuing more or less state-led, it was aimed at socialism and other, we still have the same policy flaws. I mean, you still remember the issue of Koboduse, his wife, and wanting to import a gold bed. Nkrumah even did the famous Dawn speech, where he warned against corruption and so forth, as one man, two houses, and so forth and so on. So, in the final analysis, ours, yes, neoliberal economics or neoliberal policies can be taken to an extreme. They came here to try and fix a problem. They rather created another problem. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because we, at the time, the state had actually run into our ground. We either had to keep putting money into, let's say, inefficient state enterprises that would just keep draining everything and just drive. But then in the process, they said, okay, now let's impose fees on education, health, and other. That then became inhumane. So we need to balance the two. The efficiency of the market and the effectiveness
Let me just
of the
put it a
state.
bit. One of the areas Ghana government keeps in our monetary policy, we do something called inflation targeting. For example, a lot of people feel that is one of the manifestations of that type of economic thinking. That is outdated. It's not useful for the kind of economy you have. The kind of inflation we have is not the type that you need inflation targeting to control.
I couldn't agree with you more.
So which is why when you say... we've had inflation targeting since Rawlings.
No,
all governments have done it.
But
this is monetary policy.
But the article I sent you, the COVID creed that I wrote about, I dealt specifically with that. But you don't have to put any label on that. It's a substantive policy issue that whether it's socialist or whatever, we need to discuss ourselves that this thing has failed. Inflation targeting has failed, and we need to understand why it has failed rather than putting labels on it. It has failed because we have a post-colonial economy where inflation is basically a structural phenomenon and less of a monetary phenomenon. So you think of inflation as, let's say, rock formation, where about 80% of that is structural because things are inefficient. For instance, we have Dumsor now, so it raises the cost of doing business and it feeds into the... So the Bank of Ghana has no control over solving Dumsor. So that's the structural component of that. But there are aspects of inflation also that are monetary in nature that the Bank of Ghana has control over. So these are issues, again, beyond the labels, are serious policy and institutional weaknesses that we need to address. Because if we don't do that, we can do labels...
Okay, so let's deal with something which is common to us. So, for example, as we speak, Ghana cedi to the dollar is about 5.9 to the dollar.
Yes.
And I know the government is spending at least 50 million per month or something to support the cedi.
Yes.
People are predicting that by end of the year it will be around 6.5 to the dollar.
Yes.
So pumping dollars from the Bank of Ghana to support the cedi is not going to work in the long term. We are still going to keep falling.
Yes.
How do you deal with that? Is it a question of consuming local goods and then losing the scarce dollars you have to just buy intermediate goods? How do you operationalize that? Eating local rice and stuff like this. Talk to me about the kind of economics we need to be talking about. Budget is in a few days.
Yes.
How do we deal with an issue like the currency depreciation, tastes, manufacturing, and the kind of things we need to see to move the economy forward?
They are both structural and policy, structural and institutional causes of the persistent depreciation of the cedi. It's across Africa, it happens, but let's stick with Ghana. Some of the structural causes, for instance, are the disproportionate dependence on cocoa, for example. We tend to think that, oh, well, now we are diversified, we export oil, we export gold, and they all appear on paper, but they don't quite reflect in our reserves. Nobody really knows what happens. In fact, when we started producing oil in 2011, I believe, the first 2 years they never really paid any taxes. It wasn't until a third year before they started. So yes, we may be exporting oil on paper. The money doesn't really end up in our reserves. Gold is the largest foreign exchange earner on paper, but it hardly ends up. The only source of real dependable foreign exchange is the cocoa that actually comes into the country. But that also is seasonal. So if you look at the exchange rate flows of the cocoa, it spikes in October, November, and by the beginning of the following year, it begins to decline. It declines for the rest of the year and then spikes again. So it zigzags. And this is one of the structural causes of the cedi's perennial depreciation. The lack of consistent inflow of exchange rate dollars in this case to support that. Because, as I said, the gold money goes somewhere, the oil money goes. The only source, it's also seasonal and therefore unreliable. That's one. Two, the outflow. First of all, there's also the issue of lack of a transparent and effective export development strategy. When we prepared the 40-year plan, we proposed a reclassification of exports from traditional and non-traditional to one strategic exports, high-value exports that are going to bring us a steady stream of exchange rate of forex that will help stabilize the cedi over time. This hasn't been done, so we still rely on that same old approach for doing that. So that's one of the structural determinants of the cedi's perennial depreciation. We have institutional factors also, such as pricing everything at the ports in dollars when you don't chop dollars. So it becomes a cycle.
But does reducing import not become the most important factor here?
It doesn't necessarily. Depends on what imports are you looking
Consumables.
At. Consumables.
Toothpicks. Clothes.
Yes, but you need to, before you...
Orange juice. Rice.
Exactly.
Chicken.
Exactly. But you need to be able to provide them. It's not that are you reducing or banning them?
Yeah, but if the point is a couple of things. If you can't, because the money you need to, this is my, you are looking, the reason there's pressure on the cedi is that you are always going to wherever to buy consumables from abroad, which you can produce here.
The question is, no, if you can produce, why are you not producing it?
Yeah, but that's
because
why...
we place obstacles. our interest rates alone, again, one of the studies we did, our interest at the time it was 30%. That's average. That means it's lower for some and higher for others. We compared that, right now it's around 20 something, but it's still very high. Compared to China, at the time it was 4.5, now it's down to around 2%. So the issue of interest rate alone for running a business here becomes a challenge. Here we are with DUMSO again, another structural impediment to being because you can't just produce, you must produce at an internationally competitive level, and you must have a program, a long-term program. And let me highlight the issue of DUMSO. I brought this thing here. I don't know if can your camera pick this up?
Yeah, I'm sure we can.
Okay. Because it goes to some of the structural challenges that we face.
Ghana, South Korea, Malaysia.
Ghana, South Korea, Malaysia.
Let's take a shot. When we come back, I'll show this in detail because it's a per capita electricity consumption. That will be the final argument. This is the point of view. You're trying to understand the economy of Ghana and linking that to Africa. My guest, Dr. Nimoy Thompson, stay with us.
Good Day Energy Drink keeps you going. Available in major supermarkets and shops near you. Excessive drinking can be detrimental to your health. Not recommended for persons under 18 years, lactating mothers, pregnant women, and people sensitive to caffeine. This advert is FDA approved.
Fellow Ghanaians, the Ministry of Health, Ghana Health Service and partners are introducing a vaccine against the deadly coronavirus. From March 2021, Ghana begins a free national vaccine rollout for all persons 18 years and above, starting with healthcare workers, government officials, security services, the aged, and persons with underlying conditions. The COVID-19 vaccine is safe, effective, and has been tested and approved by the FDA. Please remember, the vaccine is an additional preventive measure, so all existing protocols must continue. Let us continue to wear our face mask, frequently wash hands with soap under running water for at least 20 seconds, or sanitize often and practice social distancing. Stop the spread. Get vaccinated against coronavirus for additional protection and prevention. This message is from Ministry of Health, Ghana Health Service and partners. This advertisement is FDA approved.
Welcome back. This is still the point of view. You're trying to understand Ghana's economy and how to fix that. Don't forget, there's a big budget presentation on Friday. We understand the majority that's going to read the budget. Finance Minister has not been vetted yet. Initially, it was speculated the Vice President was going to read it. Then we're told the Trade Minister was going to read it. Now we're told the majority that's going to read it. Anyhow,
oh, really?
Yeah, so now the latest is that Chairman Sabo was going to read the budget.
Oh, wow.
I'll take your comments on the budget. But you're trying to show me something in this chart.
Yes.
What are you trying to display?
One of the persistent structural impediments to production, which indirectly also affects your city. And I find it particularly interesting because after almost 10 years, we are back to DUMSO again.
Yeah.
And this is actually from the 40-year plan analysis that we did. And even though it ends in 2013, if you extend it to 20, even now to last year, is pretty much
so the yellow line is gone at the bottom.
The yellow line is gone. Look at the gap. And in the plan, we try to move the discussion on energy production or electricity generation from installed capacity to actual electricity consumed, because you can have increasing installed capacity and still not have that. Now look at the gap.
So this is per capita consumption
of electricity, which is an indication
power being actually used, not machines imported, precisely, and contract signed.
Thank you, thank you.
All right.
And this is electricity being used by industry, by agriculture, by households, by commercial entities and other. And it's an indication of the fundamental strength of your economy. Now look at the
orange line. South Korea is just going up.
Exactly.
Blue line, Malaysia
is rising.
Ghana.
Ghana has gone to sleep.
This is more than a
almost 30
decade.
years. No, this is almost 30 years.
30
It ends at
years.
2013.
Wow.
In fact, let me just give you. In between this period, South Korea's went up by 8,054. Malaysia went up by 3,366. Ghana's went up by 55
Are you serious?
per capita. And it ends in 2013, but I've looked at the most recent for Ghana.
It's the same.
It's gone up from 382 to 462. And even that, after 30 years, our electricity consumption per capita is lower than it was for Malaysia 30 years ago.
Are you serious?
Yes.
So Malaysia in 1990 was consuming more power than we are
It was
consuming today.
consuming 1,146, and we are
capita.
doing around 460.
This is Malaysia.
Per capita, yes. And South Korea in particular is higher because it's highly because of the automobile industry, which is highly electricity intensive.
They're manufacturing Hyundai.
Exactly. So it's one of the highest in the world, actually. But the lesson here is the small gap and how it has opened up while Ghana has virtually, literally, and figuratively gone to sleep.
And this is all parties, the Rawlings, Kufuor, Mahama,
It
everybody.
cuts across. And I'll share an
Wow.
article here with you because, and it pains me to raise these things because these are the kinds of analysis.
But
we
why
do.
is this important?
It is important because it reflects the structural impediments to growth. Even the export thing we're talking about. If your electricity production, look at what's been happening the past few weeks, is stalled,
Yeah.
then you have no hope in the global economy and your currency will continue to sink. You have to keep importing. Toothpick is not as simple as it is. You need reliable electricity to produce toothpick.
So it's not just the taste of the people.
No.
It's the industrial capacity.
Exactly. And failed policies.
Wow.
Failed policies. When we did the 40-year plan, someone submitted an explanation because Doomsday is not recent.
You wanted to show me
He
this.
did it. I'll give it to you. Unfortunately, the person did not write their name, but he provides the most comprehensive, most credible explanation of why we've had Doomsday since 1982.
Wow.
I'll leave it with you.
What are some of the facts? Can I have a look?
Basically, you can share it with your
Genesis
audience.
of Doomsaw.
Yes, 1982 till
Wow.
now.
I need to do a separate program on this.
No, you can even
A
put
full
that.
program on this,
The
yes.
public needs to know, and that's what we're trying to do to demystify economic policy, demystify planning, so that the public knows.
Okay.
How is it that for 30 years we've been
So, Doc,
lobotomized?
budget to be read on Friday. What do you think the top 3 priorities should be? Because in your COVID creed, you've mentioned how to rethink fiscal policy, rethink monetary policy, you've
Activists-
spoken about power.
Yes.
So just make it simple. What are the top 3 things whoever is managing our economy should be thinking about as they prepare a budget for Friday?
Well, first of all, I hope the electricity doesn't go off. That's one. It could go off.
You've enjoyed the presentation.
Even before the presentation, before they start sweltering. Well, sticking to the article you talk about, I did talk about activist fiscal policy, fiscal and monetary policy. That means we need to shy away from this thing about we don't want to borrow this and that. There's nothing wrong with borrowing if you are borrowing for the right thing. And once you borrow, you should be able to prove what you borrowed for. It should ideally go into infrastructure. So we need a transparency, a framework. Currently, the government has so much undermined our confidence in how it spends our money that it will somehow have to restore that on our side.
So that's one.
That's one. Two, sticking with the article and learning from the lessons of COVID
And the crisis.
we need to prioritize the formalization of the informal economy. When we talk about the Ghanaian economy, it's basically the informal economy. And so any agenda for economic transformation that doesn't look at the transformation or the formalization of the informal economy is almost certainly doomed to fail.
So when you talk of formalization, you're talking about having them properly registered, have a tax system, knowing where they are, not just doing arbitrary business in some corner.
That's one, but the informal sector is a spectrum. There's a whole section there they call own account. Those are the survivalist activities, petty trading. It's not, for them, it's not a question of registration. It's a question of skills in getting wage employment. Then you have the middle, the professionals who need to register. You have the SMEs. There's a whole nomenclature for
formalize
that.
the informal.
Formalize the informal. And then
Third
the
point.
third point, pay closer, put premium on local economic development.
Local economic development.
Local economic development. Again, the national economy is the aggregation of local economies. And so if you want to develop the national economy, it's only logical that you pay attention to local economies. Local economies have been sabotaged in this country. They've been subverted. They've been impeded. It's part of the research that I did, where one of the, I won't mention the district that I did the study in, but while I was there, one of the districts was actually trying to mobilize money for development. And then someone sent word from Accra that stop collecting the taxes because you are making the government unpopular.
Wow.
And so they had to stop. Meanwhile, they have serious deficit.
So rethink economic policy, formalize the economy, and
activist macroeconomic policy, but with transparency. You are not just going to collect more money. We need to know how you are spending the money. That's one. Formalization of the informal economy in all its forms, including, for instance, markets. Look at what the pandemic showed us about our markets. We need to modernize our markets, and so forth. And then the third one is treating local economic development as the foundation.
Local economic development.
Local economic development as the foundation for national.
I hope to talk to you soon. Thank you for
no
your
problem
insights.
at all.
Always good talking to you. Dr. Nimoy Thompson has been very, very consistent since his Africanomist days. And these days he's a private citizen doing international consultancy. He's a big man, Rob. Thank you so much for being on the show. My name is Bernard Avile. We hope you had a good time, learned something new. We'll be with you next time. Bye-bye.